The morning started like any other disaster in David's life. He woke up 20 minutes late, his phone alarm having died sometime in the night because he'd forgotten to charge it. Again. The interview was at 10, and it was already 8:45. He'd planned everything perfectly the night before. The route, the timing, even which subway car to board to exit closest to the building. All of that planning meant nothing now as he stumbled around his tiny apartment, trying to find a clean shirt that didn't need ironing. 6 months. That's how long it had been since his business went under. 6 months of watching his savings disappear like water through his fingers. 6 months of telling himself tomorrow would be different, that the next application would be the one. His grandmother's voice echoed in his head, the way she used to tell him that hard work and good character would always see him through. He wished she were still here. She would have known what to say to make this all feel less terrifying. David grabbed his folder of documents and rushed out the door, not bothering with breakfast. His stomach was too twisted up to eat anyway. This job, this interview, it had to work out. The rent was already 2 weeks late, and his landlord had stopped being understanding about a month ago. As he jogged down the stairs of his building, he mentally rehearsed the answers he'd practiced. My greatest weakness? I care too much about the details. No, that sounded ridiculous. Everyone said that. The subway platform was packed with the usual morning crowd. David squeezed into a car that smelled like coffee and someone's too strong cologne. He held onto the overhead rail and tried to calm his breathing. The foundation he was interviewing with seemed almost too good to be true. A non-profit focused on education and youth development. The kind of place that actually tried to make a difference. He'd spent hours researching them, learning about their programs, imagining himself being part of something meaningful again. When he emerged from the subway station downtown, the autumn air hit him like a wake-up call, sharp and cold, carrying the smell of roasted nuts from a nearby vendor. He checked his watch. 9:28. The building was 6 blocks away. He could make it if he walked fast. No, if he walked very fast. David wove through the crowd on the sidewalk, his mind racing faster than his feet. What if they asked about why his business failed? Should he be honest about the mistakes he made? Or would that make him look incompetent? His business partner had blamed him for taking on too much debt too quickly. Maybe that was true. Maybe he'd been too ambitious, too eager to prove himself. The crosswalk ahead showed the red hand signal, but David barely slowed down. He'd jaywalk if he had to. Time was ticking away, but then something made him stop. Not the traffic signal, not the cars rushing past. It was a sound, a small, worried sound that cut through all the city noise. An old man stood at the edge of the sidewalk, one hand gripping a wooden walking cane that looked almost as old as he was. His other hand trembled slightly as he held it up, shading his eyes from the morning sun, trying to judge the distance across the street. He wore a gray suit that had probably been expensive once, but now showed its age in the slight shine of the fabric and the careful repair at one elbow. His white hair was neatly combed, and despite the worry on his face, there was something dignified about him. David watched as the light changed to green. The walking signal appeared. The old man took one hesitant step forward, then stopped as a taxi horn blared somewhere nearby. He stepped back onto the curb, breathing hard. For a moment, David stood frozen. He looked at his watch again. 9:32. He looked at the old man. He looked down the street toward where he needed to go. Every practical bone in his body screamed at him to keep moving. This wasn't his problem. There were other people around. Someone else would help, but nobody else was helping. The crowd flowed around the old man like water around a stone, everyone too busy with their own urgent lives to notice someone who needed a hand. David thought about his grandmother again, about all the times she'd been that person, the one who needed help in a world that moved too fast. About how she used to tell him that you could measure a man's worth by what he did when nobody was watching, and he had something to lose. He walked over to the old man, his interview anxiety momentarily forgotten. "Excuse me." "Sir," David said, keeping his voice gentle. "Do you need help getting across?" The old man looked up at him, and David saw relief flood his weathered face. Up close, he could see the man's eyes were a pale blue, kind but tired. A small name tag pinned to his jacket read, "Mr. Harrison, Volunteer." "Oh, would you?" the old man said, his voice carrying the slight shake of someone well into their 80s. "These cars, they go so fast now. In my eyes, they're not what they used to be. I'm trying to get to the community center, but this crossing..." He trailed off, looking embarrassed. "It's no problem at all," David said, offering his arm. The old man took it gratefully, his grip surprisingly strong despite the trembling. They waited for the light together. David noticed his hand had stopped shaking as much now that he had support. When the signal changed, they stepped into the crosswalk. The old man moved slowly, carefully placing each step as if the ground might shift beneath him. Halfway across, a car revved its engine impatiently, waiting for them to clear the intersection. "Don't mind them," David said, though his own heart was pounding. "We're going as fast as we need to." The old man chuckled softly. "You're kind. Not everyone stops these days. Everyone's always rushing somewhere." They reached the other side, and David expected the man to thank him and move on. He glanced at his watch, 9:36. He still had time, barely, but the old man was looking around with that same confused expression, squinting at the buildings. "The community center," David found himself asking. "Which way are you heading?" Mr. Harrison pointed vaguely down the street. "It's on Maple Street, I think. Or is it Pine? I've been going there for 3 years and I still get turned around in this part of town." David pulled out his phone and quickly searched. Maple Street, 2 blocks east, 1 block north, completely out of his way. He looked at the time again. 9:37. He calculated the detour in his head. It would take at least 10, maybe 15 minutes to walk the old man there and get back on track. He thought about the interview, about the rent, about how this one chance might be all he had. Then he looked at Mr. Harrison, who was trying to hide how much that crossing had taken out of him, breathing a bit harder than he should be. "Come on," David said, making a decision that his practical brain insisted was stupid. "I'll walk you there. It's not far." The relief on the old man's face made something in David's chest tighten. When was the last time he'd done something for someone else without calculating what it might cost him? When had he become the kind of person who measured everything in terms of advantage and loss? As they started walking together, Mr. Harrison adjusted his grip on the cane and smiled. "You're missing something important, aren't you?" "I can tell. You keep checking your watch. I have a job interview," David admitted. "But I've got time." "A job interview," the old man repeated thoughtfully. "Well, then you definitely don't have time to be walking an old fool like me around the city." "You're not a fool," David said. "And yeah, I have time. What kind of volunteering do you do at the community center?" And just like that, the conversation started. Mr. Harrison's face lit up when David asked about his volunteer work. They walked slowly down the sidewalk, the old man's cane tapping a steady rhythm against the concrete. "I work with young people," Mr. Harrison said, his voice gaining strength as he talked about something he clearly loved. "Teenagers, mostly. Kids who are having a rough time in school or at home. I was a teacher for 40 years, you see. Taught history at Lincoln High School. When I retired, I thought I'd spend my days reading and watching television. Lasted about 2 weeks before I went completely crazy." David smiled despite his anxiety. 2 weeks? That's pretty good. I would have made it maybe 3 days. My wife told me I was driving her crazy too, Mr. Harrison continued, chuckling at the memory. She said, "Harold, you need to get out of this house before I murder you with your own newspaper." So I found the community center. They needed someone to help kids with homework, college applications, that sort of thing. Been doing it ever since. They paused at another intersection, waiting for the light. David checked his watch again without thinking. 9:41. His stomach churned, but he'd made his choice. He was seeing this through. "Your wife sounds like a smart woman," David said. "Was," Mr. Harrison said quietly. "She passed 3 years ago, cancer. That's actually why I increased my hours at the center." The house got too quiet without her. David didn't know what to say to that. The grief in the old man's voice was still fresh, even after 3 years. "I'm sorry," he managed. "Don't be. We had 48 good years together. That's more than most people get." Mr. Harrison looked up at David with those pale blue eyes. "You married?" "No," David said. "I was engaged once, a couple years ago. But when I started my business, I got so caught up in it that I forgot to pay attention to anything else." She left. Can't say I blame her. The light changed and they crossed. Mr. Harrison didn't say anything right away, just nodded like he understood something David hadn't quite said. "What kind of business?" the old man asked. David felt the familiar shame rising in his chest. "It was a tech startup. We made an app that was supposed to help small businesses manage their inventory and ordering. I thought it was going to change everything. Got some investors excited, hired a team. For about a year, it felt like we were on top of the world. What happened? I happened, David said, the words coming out more bitter than he intended. I pushed too hard, too fast. Took on debt we couldn't handle. Made promises to clients that we couldn't keep. My partner kept warning me to slow down, but I didn't listen. I was so sure I knew better. And then it all fell apart. Lost the investors' money. Had to let everyone go. The app died before it even really lived. Mr. Harrison was quiet for a moment, the only sound between them the tap of his cane. Finally he said, "And how long ago was this?" 6 months. I've been looking for work ever since. Today's interview. It's the first real chance I've had. The first place that actually called me back for a second round. What's the job? It's with an education foundation. They help underprivileged kids get access to better schools and programs. They want someone to manage their outreach efforts. David felt a flutter of hope just talking about it. It's not what I imagined doing with my life, but honestly, after everything, I just want to be part of something good. Something that actually helps people instead of just making money. Mr. Harrison stopped walking. They'd reached the corner of Maple Street, and there was the community center. A squat brick building with colorful murals painted on the side. The old man turned to face David directly. "Can I tell you something?" Mr. Harrison said. "I've taught thousands of students over the years. Some brilliant, some struggling, everything in between. And you want to know what I learned? The ones who succeeded weren't always the smartest or the most talented. They were the ones who failed, learned from it, and kept going. The ones who let failure make them humble instead of bitter." David felt something catch in his throat. "You made mistakes with your business," Mr. Harrison continued. "So what? That means you learned things most people never will. And now you want to help kids? That's not settling. That's wisdom." "I don't feel very wise," David said. "I feel like I'm 32 years old and starting from scratch." "Starting from scratch," Mr. Harrison repeated, a slight smile crossing his weathered face. "You know what I told my students when they said things like that? You're not starting from scratch. You're starting from experience. Big difference." They stood there for a moment. This young man with his whole uncertain future ahead of him, and this old man who'd seen enough years to know that uncertainty was just part of the deal. "Thank you for walking me here," Mr. Harrison said, extending his hand. "You didn't have to do that, especially not when you have somewhere important to be." David shook his hand. The old man's grip was firm, his palm rough with age. "I wanted to. Besides, you've given me more confidence about this interview in 10 minutes than I've had in 6 months. Then let me give you one more piece of advice," Mr. Harrison said, not letting go of David's hand. "When they ask you about your failure, and they will, don't apologize for it. Own it. Tell them what it taught you. Show them you're not afraid of hard things. That's what they really want to know. Not whether you failed, but whether you know how to get back up." David nodded, feeling something settle in his chest, some knot of anxiety loosening just a little. "Now go," Mr. Harrison said, releasing his hand. "And don't run. You still have time, and you'll just make yourself sweaty and nervous. Walk fast, walk confident." "You've got this," David laughed. "Yes, sir." He turned to go, then stopped. "Mr. Harrison, what you said about kindness earlier, when we were crossing the street, about how it's never wasted, yes? I hope you're right." The old man's smile was warm and certain. "Young man, I've been on this earth for 84 years. I've seen kindness work in ways that would surprise you. It always finds its way back. Maybe not how you expect, maybe not when you expect, but it finds its way." David wanted to believe that. He wanted to believe that stopping to help this old man wouldn't cost him the one opportunity he desperately needed. But even if it did, he realized he wouldn't take it back. There was something about Mr. Harrison, something about their conversation, that felt more important than he could quite explain. "Good luck with the kids today," David said. "Good luck with your interview," Mr. Harrison replied. "Come back and tell me how it goes sometime. I'm here every Tuesday and Thursday, 10 to 3. David nodded, waved, and started walking quickly back toward his interview. He pulled out his phone, 9:51. He had 9 minutes to make a 6-block walk. It was going to be close, really close. As he speed-walked down the street, weaving between slower pedestrians, David's mind kept going back to what Mr. Harrison had said. Starting from experience, not from scratch. Don't apologize for failure. Show them you know how to get back up. He'd spent 6 months feeling like damaged goods, like someone who'd had his shot and blown it, like the failure defined everything about him. But talking to Mr. Harrison, seeing how this old man still found purpose and joy in helping others even after losing his wife, even at 84 years old, it shifted something in David's perspective. Maybe the failure wasn't the end of his story. Maybe it was just the middle. He reached the building with 2 minutes to spare, slightly out of breath, but not the disaster he'd feared. The lobby was all marble and glass, intimidatingly professional. David took a moment to straighten his tie, smooth down his hair, and catch his breath. As he rode the elevator to the 12th floor, he thought about his grandmother again. About how she used to say that doing the right thing wasn't always the easy thing, but it was always worth it. About how character was built in small moments, in the choices you made when nobody was looking. He'd chosen to help an old man cross the street. He'd chosen to walk him to the community center even when it meant risking being late. Were those the right choices? He didn't know yet. But they were his choices, made with full awareness of what they might cost. And somehow that felt important. The elevator doors opened. David stepped out into a carpeted hallway, following the signs to Suite 1205. This was it, everything he'd been working toward for 6 months. All the applications, all the rejections, all the doubt and fear and hope had led to this moment. He pushed open the glass door and walked up to the reception desk, where a young woman with kind eyes looked up at him. "I'm here for a 10 o'clock interview," David said, his voice steadier than he expected. "My name is David Chen." The receptionist smiled and checked her computer. "Perfect timing. They're just about ready for you. Have a seat and someone will come get you in just a moment." David sat down in one of the sleek waiting room chairs, trying not to let his nervousness show. The office was impressive. Walls covered in photographs of smiling children and teenagers, awards and certificates in frames, a mission statement painted in elegant letters that talked about breaking down barriers to education. This was the kind of place that actually mattered. The kind of place he wanted to be part of. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw an email notification. Against his better judgment, he opened it. It was from another company he'd applied to 3 weeks ago. "Thank you for your interest, but we've decided to move forward with other candidates." Another rejection. David felt the familiar sting. The voice in his head that whispered he wasn't good enough, that nobody wanted someone who'd failed so spectacularly. He quickly closed the email and put his phone away. Not now. He couldn't let that get in his head right now. "Mr. Chen?" David looked up to see a woman in her 50s standing in the doorway. She had gray-streaked black hair pulled back in a neat bun and wore a blue blazer with a scarf. Her expression was professional but warm. "I'm Rebecca Martin, the assistant director. If you'll follow me." David grabbed his folder and stood, willing his legs to feel steady. He followed Rebecca down a hallway lined with more photos, kids at science fairs at college campuses receiving awards. Every photo told a story of a life changed, an opportunity given. "Water? Coffee?" Rebecca asked as they walked. "Water would be great, thank you." She led him into a conference room that was bigger than David expected. His stomach dropped when he saw not one interviewer, but 3 people sitting at the long table. A panel interview. Nobody had mentioned it would be a panel. "David, let me introduce you," Rebecca said, gesturing to the others. "This is Thomas Wu, our finance director, and Dr. Patricia Morrison, our executive director." David shook hands with each of them, trying to project confidence he didn't quite feel. Dr. Morrison was younger than he expected, maybe early 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Thomas was older, probably close to 60, with the careful expression of someone who'd reviewed a lot of budgets and wasn't easily impressed. They all sat down. Rebecca poured David a glass of water from a pitcher on the table. His hands were shaking slightly as he took it. He hoped they didn't notice. "So, David," Dr. Morrison began, opening a folder that David recognized as his application materials. "We've reviewed your resume and your initial interview notes. Very impressive background in the tech sector. But I have to ask the obvious question, why education? Why this foundation? It's quite a shift from running a startup." Here it was. The question he'd been dreading and expecting in equal measure. David took a breath, remembering Mr. Harrison's words. "Don't apologize. Own it. It is a shift," David said, "but maybe not as big as it looks on paper. When I started my company, I thought I was doing it for the right reasons. To build something innovative, to create jobs, to make a difference. But somewhere along the way I lost sight of the making a difference part. It became about the money, about proving I could succeed. He paused, gauging their reactions. They were listening intently, no judgment visible yet. The company failed, David continued. I made a lot of mistakes. I pushed too hard, took on too much debt, ignored warning signs because I was too proud to admit I might be wrong. It was the hardest thing I've ever gone through. But it also taught me something important. Success without purpose is empty. I don't want to spend my life chasing the next big thing. I want to spend it doing something that actually matters. And you think education matters? Thomas asked. His tone wasn't challenging, just curious. I know it does, David said. My grandmother raised me. She worked 2 jobs her whole life, never finished high school herself. But she made sure I had every opportunity. She paid for tutors when I struggled with math. She drove me to every debate competition even though she was exhausted. I got a scholarship to college because of her sacrifices. Education was her way of giving me a future she never had. Dr. Morrison nodded slowly, making a note. Tell me about your management style. How do you handle conflict with team members? The interview continued for what felt like hours but was probably only 45 minutes. They asked about his technical skills, his understanding of nonprofit work, his vision for outreach programs. David answered as honestly as he could, drawing on his real experiences, both successes and failures, to illustrate his points. Then Dr. Morrison asked a question that caught him off guard. David, tell us about a time when you helped someone without expecting anything in return, just because it was the right thing to do. David blinked, surprised by the shift. This didn't feel like a standard interview question. His mind immediately went to that morning, to Mr. Harrison struggling at the crosswalk. Actually, David said, something happened this morning, on my way here. He told them about seeing the old man, about the choice to stop even though he was running late, about walking Mr. Harrison to the community center, about their conversation. As he spoke, he saw something shift in Dr. Morrison's expression. A flicker of interest, maybe recognition. This old man, Dr. Morrison said when David finished. Did you catch his name? Mr. Harrison, David said. He was wearing a name tag. He volunteers at a community center on Maple Street. He's a retired teacher. Dr. Morrison and Rebecca exchanged a look that David couldn't quite read. Thomas leaned back in his chair, a slight smile on his face. What did you two talk about? Dr. Morrison asked. He asked about my interview. I told him about my business failing, about looking for work. He told me about his wife passing away, about why he volunteers. He gave me advice, actually. Told me not to apologize for failure, to own it. To show that I know how to get back up. And did that advice help? Rebecca asked. David smiled slightly. Yeah, it did. I almost didn't tell you about the company failing. I was going to dance around it, make it sound less bad than it was. But talking to Mr. Harrison reminded me that trying to hide who you are and what you've been through doesn't help anyone. The 3 interviewers were quiet for a moment. David couldn't tell if that was good or bad. Maybe he'd said too much. Maybe talking about a random encounter with an old man made him seem unfocused. Maybe they thought he was making it up. Well, Dr. Morrison said finally, closing her folder, I think we have everything we need. Do you have any questions for us? David did have questions. About the position's responsibilities, about the foundation's goals for the next year, about what success would look like in this role. They answered thoroughly, and he found himself getting more excited with each answer. This place was doing real work. Important work, the interview wrapped up. They shook hands again. Rebecca walked him back to the lobby. How do you think you did? She asked as they waited for the elevator. Honestly, I have no idea, David admitted. But I gave honest answers. That's all I can do, Rebecca smiled. That's all anyone can ask for. We'll be in touch within a week. David rode the elevator down, his mind replaying every answer, every question, every expression on their faces. Had he said the right things? Had mentioning Mr. Harrison been weird? Should he have prepared a better answer about why he wanted to work in education? He stepped out into the autumn sunshine, the afternoon now fully underway. People rushed past him on the sidewalk, everyone with somewhere to be. David checked his phone. It was only 11:30. The whole interview had taken an hour and a half, but it felt like it had been days. Another email notification popped up. David almost didn't want to look, afraid it would be another rejection. But he opened it anyway. It was from his landlord. A reminder that rent was now 3 weeks late and he needed payment by the end of the week, or she'd have to start eviction proceedings. David felt his stomach turn. 3 days. He had 3 days to come up with money he didn't have. He started walking, not sure where he was going. Just walking to move, to think, to not stand still and panic. What if he didn't get this job? What if they thought he was too risky, too much of a failure? What if he lost his apartment? What would his grandmother think if she could see him now? His feet carried him without conscious thought, and somehow he ended up on Maple Street. The community center was right there, its colorful murals bright in the midday sun. Through the window he could see people moving around inside. Kids, probably, and volunteers helping them. David thought about Mr. Harrison in there working with teenagers who were struggling, giving his time freely because he believed it mattered. Still finding purpose and joy at 84, even after losing the love of his life. Starting from experience, not from scratch. David didn't go inside. He wasn't sure why he'd walked here, but standing outside looking at that building, something in him settled. However the interview turned out, he'd done his best. He'd been honest. He'd shown them who he really was, failures and all, and maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. He pulled out his phone and typed a reminder for Tuesday. Visit Mr. Harrison at Community Center. He didn't know if he'd have good news or bad news to share by then, but he wanted to tell the old man how the interview went. Somehow that felt important. David walked to the subway, rode home to his tiny apartment, and waited. That's all he could do now. Wait and hope that kindness really did find its way back like Mr. Harrison had promised. 3 days passed like molasses. David spent those 3 days in a fog of anxiety. He checked his email obsessively, sometimes every 5 minutes, hoping to see something from the foundation. Each time his phone buzzed, his heart would jump, only to sink when it was just spam or another automated rejection from some other company he'd applied 2 weeks ago. On Tuesday morning, he woke up to his landlord knocking on his door. She wasn't mean about it, but she was firm. The rent had to be paid by Friday or she'd have no choice but to start the eviction process. She had a mortgage to pay too. David understood. That didn't make it any less terrifying. He'd applied to every job he could find that day. Retail positions. Warehouse work. Anything that would get him some money fast. Most applications went into the void with automated, "We'll contact you if there's interest" messages. 2 places called him back for interviews the following week. Minimum wage positions. Better than nothing, but nowhere near enough to cover his rent and bills. Wednesday brought nothing. No emails, no calls, no news. David tried to distract himself by updating his resume again. He'd updated it so many times in the past 6 months that he could probably recite every word from memory. Thursday morning, his phone rang. Unknown number. David's hand shook as he answered. Hello? Hi, is this David Chen? Yes, this is David. This is Rebecca Martin from the Children's Education Foundation. Do you have a moment to talk? David's heart hammered so hard he could feel it in his throat. Yes, absolutely. We'd like you to come in tomorrow for a final meeting with Dr. Morrison. Would 10 o'clock work for you? A final meeting. What did that mean? Was it good? Bad? Another interview? Yes, 10 o'clock works perfectly. Wonderful. See you then. She hung up before David could ask any questions. He stared at his phone, trying to decode those 30 seconds of conversation. A final meeting. Just with Dr. Morrison, not the whole panel. That had to mean something, right? He barely slept that night. His mind spun through every possibility. Maybe they wanted to reject him in person. Maybe they had more questions. Maybe, and he barely let himself think this, maybe they wanted to offer him the job. Friday morning, David arrived at the foundation's office 15 minutes early. He wore the same suit as before, freshly pressed. The same tie. He'd read somewhere that consistency showed reliability. Or maybe he was just superstitious. Rebecca greeted him with a smile that seemed warmer than before. Dr. Morrison is ready for you. I'll take you to her office. Not the conference room this time. Her office. That felt more personal. More intimate. David couldn't decide if that was good or bad. Dr. Morrison's office was smaller than he expected, but filled with light from tall windows. The walls were covered with photographs, not the official foundation photos from the hallway, but personal ones. Kids hugging her. Graduation photos with handwritten thank you notes. A lifetime of changed lives documented in frames. David, please sit. Dr. Morrison said, gesturing to a comfortable chair across from her desk. Can I get you anything? Coffee, water? I'm fine, thank you. She sat down and for a moment just looked at him. Not unkindly, but with an assessing gaze that made David feel like she could see right through him. I'll get straight to the point, she said. We were very impressed with your interview. Your technical skills are solid, your understanding of outreach programs is better than we expected, and your honesty about your business failure showed real character. David felt a flutter of hope. That sounded positive. But, Dr. Morrison continued, and David's heart sank. There was always a but. We had some concerns. You're coming from a very different world. Tech startups move fast, burn bright, sometimes crash hard. Nonprofit work is different. It's slower, more methodical. The wins are smaller and take longer. We weren't sure if someone with your background would have the patience for it. David nodded, trying not to show his disappointment. This was the letdown. The gentle rejection. Then something interesting happened, Dr. Morrison said, leaning back in her chair. After your interview, I had a phone call scheduled with one of our longtime volunteers. We check in with our key volunteers every week, see how things are going, if they need anything. This particular volunteer is very special to us. He's been with us since we started, actually. Helped write our first curriculum. Still comes in twice a week to mentor kids even though he's in his 80s. David felt something prickle at the back of his neck. A strange sense of recognition. I happened to mention we'd just interviewed a candidate named David Chen. And do you know what happened? David's mouth was dry. No. He got so excited I thought he might drop the phone, Dr. Morrison said, a smile playing at her lips. Started telling me all about this young man he'd met earlier that week. How this young man had stopped to help him cross a busy street even though he was clearly in a hurry. How they'd walked together to the community center and had this wonderful conversation. How impressed he was by this young man's character and humility. David felt heat rising in his face. Mr. Harrison. Mr. Harold Harrison, Dr. Morrison confirmed. One of the finest people I've ever known, and one of the best judges of character I've ever met. He spent 40 years teaching teenagers. David, you can't fool someone who spent that much time with young people trying to fool him. She opened a folder on her desk and pulled out what looked like an email printout. Harold sent me this the day after your interview, she said, sliding it across the desk. David read it, his eyes widening. Patricia, it began, I know you can't make hiring decisions based on my opinion alone, and I wouldn't want you to. But I met your candidate David Chen this week, and I have to tell you about it. This young man saw an old fool struggling to cross the street and stopped to help me, even though he had your interview to get to. He didn't just help me across, he walked me all the way to the center, made sure I got there safely, we talked along the way. He told me about his business failing, about his struggles finding work. But he didn't complain or make excuses. He took responsibility. He talked about wanting to do meaningful work. When I asked him about his interview, I could hear the hope in his voice. Not just hope for a job, but hope for a chance to be part of something bigger than himself. I've been working with young people for more than 60 years. I know genuine character when I see it. This young man has it. He's been knocked down and he's getting back up. He's learned humility the hard way. Those are the people who make the best teachers and mentors, the ones who failed and kept going. I'm not telling you to hire him. I'm just telling you that in the 10 minutes we spent together, he showed me more about who he is than most people show in 10 years. Whatever you decide, I wanted you to know that. Your friend, Harold. David looked up from the letter, his eyes stinging. He hadn't known. Mr. Harrison hadn't mentioned knowing anyone at the foundation, hadn't mentioned he'd be talking to Dr. Morrison. Harold doesn't put his reputation on the line lightly, Dr. Morrison said quietly. In 15 years of working with him, I've never seen him write something like this about anyone. I didn't know, David said, his voice rough. I didn't know he knew you. He needed help crossing the street, I know. That's what makes it matter. Dr. Morrison folded her hands on her desk. Here's the thing, David. We can teach someone program management. We can teach data analysis and outreach strategies, but we can't teach character. We can't teach genuine empathy. We can't teach the kind of person who stops to help an old man even when they're running late for the most important interview of their life. David's heart was pounding again, but this felt different. This felt like standing on the edge of something. We want to offer you the position, Dr. Morrison said, but not the one you interviewed for. David blinked. I'm sorry? The outreach coordinator position, you'd be great at it. But we think you could do something more. We've been planning to launch a new program, something we've been developing for about a year. It's an entrepreneurship initiative for disadvantaged youth, teaching kids from struggling communities how to start their own businesses, how to manage money, how to turn ideas into reality. She leaned forward, her eyes bright with excitement. We need someone who understands both success and failure, someone who knows what it takes to build something from nothing, someone who's made mistakes and learned from them, someone who can connect with these kids not as someone looking down at them, but as someone who's been knocked down too. David's mind was reeling. You want me to build this program? Design it and run it, yes. It's a bigger responsibility than the coordinator position. More risk too. If the program doesn't work, that's on you. But if it does work, you could change hundreds of lives, maybe thousands as it grows. David couldn't find words. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it, Dr. Morrison said. This isn't a decision to make lightly. The pay is modest. This is nonprofit work. The hours are long. The results take time. You won't get rich doing this. You won't make headlines, but you will matter. Every single day you will matter. She pulled out another folder and slid it across the desk. This is the preliminary proposal for the program. Take it home, read it. Think about whether this is really what you want. If it is, call Rebecca on Monday and we'll get you started. David took the folder with shaking hands. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why me? I mean, beyond what Mr. Harrison said, there must be people with more experience in education, people who haven't failed at running a business. Dr. Morrison smiled. Because Harold was right. Failure isn't a disqualification. It's a qualification. These kids we want to help, they failed too. They've been told they can't. They won't. They shouldn't even try. They need someone who can look them in the eye and say, I fell down too, and here's how I got back up. They need someone real. She stood up, and David stood with her. Go home. Read the proposal. Think about it. And David, either way, thank you for stopping to help an old man cross the street. The world needs more people who make that choice. David walked out of the building in a daze. The folder felt heavy in his hands, full of possibility and responsibility and hope. He made it half a block before he had to sit down on a bench, his legs suddenly weak. He pulled out his phone and, without really thinking about it, he headed toward Maple Street. The community center was busier on Friday afternoon than it had been the previous week. Through the windows, David could see teenagers scattered around tables, some working on laptops, others with textbooks spread out in front of them. A few were laughing together in one corner. It looked warm and alive and real. David pushed through the door and stepped into a lobby that smelled like old books and coffee. A young woman at the front desk looked up with a welcoming smile. Can I help you? I'm looking for Mr. Harrison, Harold Harrison. Is he here today? Oh, sure, Harold's in the back study room. He's working with some of our college prep students. You can head back, down the hall, last door on the left. David walked down a hallway covered in student artwork and motivational posters. He could hear voices coming from different rooms, someone explaining a math problem, someone else reading aloud, the low murmur of concentrated work. This was where Mr. Harrison spent his time. This was what he'd chosen to do with his days. The door to the study room was half open. David knocked softly and looked in. Mr. Harrison sat at a round table with 3 teenagers, a college application spread out in front of them. He was pointing to something on the page, explaining something in that patient, gentle voice. When he looked up and saw David standing in the doorway, his whole face transformed. David, Mr. Harrison said, his eyes lighting up. Kids, excuse me for just 1 minute. He stood up slowly, using his cane for support, and made his way over to the door. Up close, David could see he was wearing the same gray suit, the same name tag, but his smile was new. Bright and knowing. You came back, Mr. Harrison said. I wasn't sure you would. I said I would, David replied. I wanted to tell you how the interview went. Mr. Harrison glanced back at his students. Give me 5 minutes? We're almost done with Stanford's essay questions anyway. He stepped into the hallway and gestured for David to follow him to a small sitting area with a couple of worn couches. They sat down, and Mr. Harrison looked at David expectantly. So, how did it go? David didn't know where to start. They offered me a job. They did? That's wonderful. Not the one I interviewed for, though. They want me to build and run a new program, teaching entrepreneurship to disadvantaged kids. David shook his head, still trying to process it. It's bigger than what I expected. More responsibility. And Mr. Harrison, they told me about your letter. The old man's expression didn't change. He didn't look embarrassed or apologetic, just nodded slightly. You didn't tell me you knew Dr. Morrison, David said. You didn't ask, Mr. Harrison replied with a small smile. And besides, I didn't help you cross the street because I knew Patricia Morrison. I helped you, well, you helped me because that's what people should do for each other. But you wrote that letter. I did. Why? Mr. Harrison was quiet for a moment, looking down at his hands on top of his cane. Can I tell you something about my life, David? When I was teaching, I had this student, bright kid, full of potential but angry at the world. Came from a tough situation at home. Failed my class twice because he wouldn't do the work, wouldn't accept help. I could have given up on him. Most teachers did. But something about him reminded me of myself at that age. I'd grown up poor, angry, convinced the world was against me. Someone had helped me, an old teacher who saw past my attitude to who I could become. So I didn't give up on this kid. I stayed late to tutor him. I called his house when he skipped class. I pushed him even when he pushed back. He graduated. Got into college on a scholarship. Became a social worker. Last I heard, he's running a program for foster kids in Chicago, helping kids who remind him of who he used to be. Mr. Harrison looked up at David. That's how it works. Someone helps us, we help someone else. The kindness moves forward. It doesn't always come back to us directly, but it comes back. I don't understand, David said. I just helped you cross the street. That's not... You stopped, Mr. Harrison interrupted gently. That's what mattered. You were late, stressed, worried about your future. You had every reason to keep walking. But you saw someone who needed help and you stopped. Then you walked with me even though it took you out of your way. You listened to an old man talk about his life. You shared your struggles with a stranger. He leaned forward slightly. David, I've been doing this volunteer work for 15 years. I've met thousands of young people. Some of them needed help with homework. Some needed help with college applications. Some just needed someone to listen. And you know what I learned? The ones who succeed aren't always the smartest or the most talented. They're the ones who see other people. Really see them. The ones who help even when it costs them something. David felt his throat tighten. I'm scared I'm not qualified for this. Teaching kids about business when I failed at it myself. Failed once, Mr. Harrison corrected. Failed once and learned from it. That makes you more qualified, not less. These kids don't need someone perfect. They need someone real. Someone who can say, I messed up and here's what I learned. Someone who knows what it feels like to fall down and have to get back up. Dr. Morrison said something similar. Patricia's a smart woman. That's why I trust her to run that foundation. Mr. Harrison smiled. So are you going to take the job? David looked down at the folder in his hands. He'd read the proposal 3 times on the subway ride over. It was ambitious, creating a full curriculum, finding mentors from the business community, securing partnerships with local companies for internships. It would take months just to get it off the ground. Maybe years to know if it was really working. It was also exactly what he'd needed when he was younger. His grandmother had given him love and support, but she didn't know anything about business or entrepreneurship. He'd had to figure it all out on his own, making mistakes that someone could have warned him about. How many kids out there were in the same position? How many had ideas and drive but no guidance, no connections, no one to believe in them? Yeah, David said quietly. Yeah, I think I am. Mr. Harrison nodded, satisfied. Good. Now I have a favor to ask. Anything. Once you get this program running, I want to volunteer for it. I may not know much about modern business, but I know kids, and I know how to listen. I could help. David felt warmth spread through his chest. I'd be honored. But Mr. Harrison, you're already volunteering here. You don't need to. I know I don't need to. I want to. The old man's eyes were bright. I told you kindness moves forward. You helped me. Now I want to help your kids. That's how it works. They sat there for a moment in comfortable silence. Through the walls, David could hear the murmur of the center's activity, lives being changed in small ways. One conversation, one tutoring session, one moment of caring at a time. I should let you get back to your students, David said finally. Walk me back? Mr. Harrison asked, standing up with his cane. My legs aren't what they used to be. David stood and offered his arm, just like he had that first day on the street corner. They walked slowly back down the hallway together. Mr. Harrison, David said as they approached the study room. That thing you said about kindness always finding its way back. Did you know? When you said that, did you know it would work out like this? The old man's smile was mysterious and warm. I knew that you were the kind of person who stops to help. I knew that Patricia Morrison values character above almost everything else. I knew that good people tend to find each other, given enough time. Did I know exactly how it would play out? No. But I've lived long enough to know that doing the right thing usually works out right, even if not in the way we expect. They reached the study room door. The three teenagers looked up expectantly. Thank you, David said, for everything. For the advice. For the letter. For believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. Mr. Harrison patted his arm. Thank your grandmother. She's the one who raised you to be the kind of man who stops to help an old fool cross the street. I just pointed Patricia in the direction of what was already there. She passed away 5 years ago. I know. You mentioned her in your interview. Patricia told me. Mr. Harrison's voice was gentle. But she's still with you, David. In every choice you make. In every person you help. That's how we live on. Through the kindness we teach others to show. David nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Now go home. Start planning your program. Monday morning you call Rebecca and tell her yes. Then you get to work changing some lives. Mr. Harrison's eyes twinkled. And remember, when those kids frustrate you, when they make mistakes, when they fail at something, be patient with them. Somebody was patient with you. David left the community center with tears in his eyes and hope in his chest. The afternoon sun was warm on his face as he walked toward the subway. He passed the intersection where he'd first seen Mr. Harrison struggling to cross. It looked different now. Everything looked different. He pulled out his phone and called Rebecca's number, not waiting until Monday. Rebecca Martin. Hi, Rebecca. This is David Chen. I know Dr. Morrison said to think about it over the weekend, but I don't need to. I want to accept the position. I want to build this program. He could hear the smile in her voice. I was hoping you'd say that. Can you come in Monday morning? We have a lot of work to do. I'll be there. David hung up and stood there on the sidewalk for a moment, letting it all sink in. 6 months ago, his business had failed. 6 months of rejection and doubt and fear. 6 months of wondering if he'd ever find his way again. And then he'd helped an old man cross the street. Such a small thing. Such an ordinary choice. But it had led to a conversation. And that conversation had led to advice that changed how he approached his interview. And that interview had led to a letter from a man he'd known for less than an hour. And that letter had led to an opportunity to do something meaningful with his life. Kindness is never wasted, Mr. Harrison had said. It always finds its way back. David smiled and started walking. He had a program to plan, kids to help, a future to build. Not the future he'd imagined when he started his company. Not the path he thought he'd be on. But somehow it felt more right than anything he'd planned for himself.